Hi everybody, Dr. Joel Hunter here, Philosophy 210, World Religions. This is a short video, well, might be not so short, but it's a video we're going to cover the model that I have designed for you to use to study for the 5 religions and prepare for the quizzes, as well as to sort of really dig into each religion and unpack something that is common to all 5 religions. We're going to get into the heart of what that model is in just a moment, but I just wanted to mention that the model is a challenging assignment, but I found it to be the most useful tool to dig into often very unfamiliar content and sometimes very difficult to get. Now, your texts, the Smith text and the Novak text, are both excellent. Now, the Novak text gives you primary sources, the samples of the religious texts from the religions themselves. The Smith text is commentary, so Smith is describing the religion for you. So you take that as a commentator, not as a representative of one of the religions speaking for himself. Okay, so that is why I have the model for you, because the reading, especially in the Smith reading, is not always easy to figure out what do I really need to focus in on here. What are the key ideas? And that's what the model does. It lays out for you the key ideas. We're going to go through that in just a moment. Now, this is a reshoot of an older video that I've done about the model, and I've kind of honed the model since the first time I wheeled it out. And I think I've gotten it to the point now where I can step through a presentation with you and show you some of the things that I hadn't covered earlier. And these will hopefully overcome some of the difficulties that students in the past have had. And so give you a leg up, especially since our course is a sprint, right? We got 5 weeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick off the presentation. And by the way, what I recommend as I do this is that you have the handout that I've uploaded. It's a PDF that goes into much more detail about each of the points that we're going to cover and has lots of important stuff packed into even the footnotes. And have that open as we go through this, because what I've got on the presentation is a very simplified version. I just simply want to get you through the main points of it and then give you something to work with. So you can use then the full handout and hopefully this presentation will help you digest that. But you really do need that full handout to be able to get into the heart of what we gotta understand. And your first use of the model is going to be in the inventory quiz that you're going to take at the very beginning, and then the next one will be actually applied to a religion, to Hinduism. So look for those. They'll be uploaded in the first week of the class. So let me switch the screens now and get right to the presentation. Hopefully you will have a clear view of the slides for the presentation, and I'll stay down here in the bottom. But I just want to overlay a little commentary as I go through this. Now I'm going to upload the presentations to the course canvas so that you can review these slides as you like. And I'll also do it as a PDF in case you prefer that format. But like I said, you should have your other PDF, the PDF of the full model. You should have that open as we go through this, because we're going to move rather fast and you'll want to jot down some notes as we hit each of the points in that handout. Okay, so let's get right to it. So the thing that I open with is to point out what we're doing in this class is you're reading essentially a menu. You're reading the Smith text. You're reading some of the primary texts from each religion. And the point of this is to give you a really good description of what is available from the chef. And the chef is going to be the religion. It's going to be the specific cuisine at this restaurant. So you can think of each religion as a restaurant, and you're going to look at the menu. Now, if you've been to a restaurant, then you know that reading the menu is a lot different than getting the food and tasting the food. So what we do in the class, it's more like reading the menu. There's value in that. I mean, it's much better to taste the food, obviously, but that's not the point of the class. Tasting the food, and the analogy here is for you to actually participate in the religion, to in a knowing way. but the menu is designed to give you sort of the best presentation of what you could order. And that's the way I want you to sort of think about what we're up to in this class. There's no agenda. The agenda is for you to come to a very clear and knowledgeable grasp of the key ideas and key practices of each religion and why they are key in those religions. And to be able to reflect on those and then sort of extend your thinking beyond just the sort of bullet point knowledge, that you could sort of spit back. Well, here's some vocabulary, and here's some of the main ideas. But to actually synthesize that and use and compare it in a constructive way rather than in a superficial way. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do the menu. We're not going to do the food itself. Okay. But hopefully, the menu, if well presented by your course text as well as me, will give you, get a whiff of the religion. You'll hear it. You'll smell it cooking in the kitchen, and it'll be at least palatable, or it'll be something. Oh wow, that's interesting. I wonder what that would taste like. So hopefully, that's the sort of thing that you get out of the class, and especially the use of this model. Now, defining religion is notoriously difficult, but that's not going to stop me or us from trying to do it. And what I'd like to do is sort of put up a couple candidates and then knock them down and then move on to a working definition that I think is really good. So let's look at that. First one is, religion is, a certain set of beliefs and doctrines and teachings, right? So this would be the various things that religions claim or teach. And we're definitely going to be looking at that. We want to know what those things are, because the specifics of those beliefs and those teachings are often similar across religions, but also obviously very different in some cases with religions. And so the problem with only focusing on beliefs and doctrines is that it doesn't get us to the sort of broadest part of what a religion is. Religion answers existential questions. It answers questions of purpose and meaning and value and worth, not only for the individual human life, but often on a cosmic scale, or almost always on a cosmic scale, at least in the major religions. And so that's why beliefs and doctrines really aren't enough. And unless you get a flavor for how these are of existential concern, in other words, somebody feels that their life's purpose and meaning is unanswerable without some sort of religious experience or practice, that they feel that they could be better. They could live a kind of better life. They could get out of problems that they have. Lots of those kinds of things really have nothing to do with the beliefs and doctrines. It has more to do with their practices. So that's oftentimes what the other issue is you look at what are the rituals of the religion and how do they differ. So we'll look at that in just a second. But before I go on, I want to talk about what kind of problem, if you only look at beliefs and doctrines, why this creates a particular problem, a very difficult problem. And that is what philosophers call a demarcation problem. And that is to tell the difference between a genuine and a pseudo-religion. And at the level of beliefs and doctrines, you can't really solve this demarcation problem, I don't think, in a constructive way. And so you're looking at, in our case, the genuine religions, and there's an image of the ones we'll be looking at, some symbols representing them. But how do you tell the difference between, say, Hinduism there on the far left and Pastafarianism? Is Pastafarianism a genuine religion? Well, look at beliefs. Well, they have beliefs and they have doctrines, right? What about humanism, or transhumanism, I should say? What about that? Is that a genuine religion or a pseudo-religion? Okay, so you look at not only beliefs and doctrines, but you also look at practices. But you can't just look at practices. But even though these are very important, you're looking at them, what people in the religion do and why they do it. You're looking at rites and rituals. You're looking at a whole way of life, in fact. And so which activities then constitute a religious life? And that sounds pretty promising, and that's sort of where I was pushing the earlier point about the problems with just looking at beliefs and doctrines. The problem is with with practices, is that it looks like there are other kinds of practices that would have the same sort of devotion, even worship. Say, take college sports, for example. I mean, if you've ever seen some of these pictures of fans who have these totally decked out rooms dedicated to a team, that almost looks like a shrine, like someplace you would go and you would venerate the team. That sounds almost religious. But see, that gets back to that demarcation problem again. Is that genuine religion, or is that just an ersatz, or a pseudo-religion? It looks like a religion in some ways, but those are superficial ways, right? We want to be able to really cut to the heart of what is a genuine religion, if we can. So this is the working definition that I've got. So one of the things that's common to all the religions that we're reading is that they define human life from with a religious lens as some sort of quest. So the religious individual is on a quest of some kind, and there are different terms that are used in different religions for that, but they all coalesce around this idea of being on a quest, of human life as a quest. And we'll get to what in just a moment. But so you may look at terms like a way, like the Tao is the way. People will speak of being on a journey. There are churches named Journey to sort of embody that idea. Or pilgrimage, which is common to lots of religions. The idea of going from one place to grow or to be transformed by traveling to some destination. And so that can be expanded to include all of life, being a pilgrimage, where we are in this mortal life as as pilgrims. We're not at home here, or it's temporary, and our ultimate place or ultimate destiny, where we'll be completely fulfilled, is wherever that destination is, whatever that is. So the religious individual can be said to be on a quest. And so if you're on a quest, that means you're going from one place to another. The tale of the Hobbit, right? The tale is a tale of there and back again. So where are you going from? Where is this quest starting from? And religions have a way of talking about this that I use the term human predicament to define. That's the term there in orange at the bottom. I think that's orange, at least. I don't know how it looks on your screen. But there's all different kinds of ways that this human predicament manifests itself in ordinary life as well as extraordinary circumstances. But some common themes come out when religions talk about, well, what are we on a quest away from? What do we want to get to or out of? And so this human predicament, they talk about ignorance, being in a state of ignorance about reality, about truth, being captivated by illusions, that we look at life outside this the absolute, and it's full of illusions that distract us or keep us from becoming who we can be. Or they speak of an affliction, like a sickness or an illness. You'll see that in Buddhism especially. So who wants to stay like that? Same thing with captivity or bondage. It's really rational if you are experiencing the life of a prisoner to want to be free of that. So it's not an escape from reality in the sense that it's an escape from something that is fine and dandy. It's an awareness of life as it naturally is feels at times like a prison, whether it's sort of inward focused, where you're focusing on your own self, or you're focused on the external circumstances. It can be a literal captivity or bondage as well. But you'll find that terminology used a lot to describe the human predicament. Another way is to just be aware of your own imperfections and feel that as a burden that you are constantly carrying around. And it would be great to be able to overcome those imperfections. And then just a general dissatisfaction with life as it naturally comes to us. And, we can be optimistic or pessimistic, it doesn't really matter. But we're all going to, according to religions, we're all going to have some sense that, events that looked promising and that you had lots of hopes for, it didn't measure up. It really didn't turn out as well. You'll see a quote in your text from, I think it's H.G. Wells, who said, it's a very common question as you age. Stop looking at me like that. It's a very common question as you age to look back on your life and say, is this all there is? Even if you've accomplished a lot. In fact, experience shows that people who often accomplish the most, who make amazing contributions to humanity, often have these self-doubts and sense of this. There's more that could have been had. So anyway, that is sort of the state at which a religious insight comes in to say, okay, I'm not going to just take this human predicament. I am going to try to go and get out of this predicament. And so you go on a quest. To what, though? And that's the next question. This is actually the third question of the model, and that is, you want to escape or get out of or overcome the human predicament, and the religions will all claim to have, at the end of that quest, of the journey or the way, is some supreme good. And here is a little caution about language. Because the religions are often describing things that escape the power of language to capture, they will rely on analogies and metaphors to be able to communicate that. And let me just take the middle one there in that list, higher life. If you look at that, so higher life. What does that mean concretely? Okay, what does it mean to have a higher life? So okay, think of the opposite. Think of a low life. Sometimes people are called low lives. What does that connote? If you take that literally, you're not talking about them as like short. You're not talking about them as being good at limbo. You're not talking about them, that they don't like to live or work above the ground floor. That's not what a low life is, right? It has more to do with a character. And so higher life is a metaphor. It's not a spatial, it's not literally a spatial difference. It's a spatial metaphor. And it's a recognition that supreme good is something that requires striving and it requires work to attain. And that every now and then, through the quest, you get a glimpse of just how amazing and high how that higher life, that highest end, your full potential can be. And that taste is what keeps you often going. It keeps you focused on the goal. So that is, in a nutshell, what the quest is to. Okay, so there we've got the first bit done, which is to define. Now, there's one missing piece and that all religions will try to provide, and that is, well, how do I do this? How do I get on this quest, first of all, and get from where I am to where I want to get to? And so religions have some sort of account that I would call salvation. And it comes, again, with different terminology depending on the religion. And a lot of times these do cross over and they share terminology. So how, one thing you will find common to all of them is it's going to require some sort of wisdom. You're going to have to gain some specific kind of knowledge to get on the way. You will find also the salvation requires truth. Call it truth contact. Not just sort of intellectual grasp of beliefs or doctrines. It's not enough. It's like being in contact with the truth. It is being related to truth in some way that you are overcoming the predicament and you are making progress on the way to your destination. And only if the religion describes reality as it really is that going to work, right? So that's sort of the empirical test, is to look at what the practitioners actually do and what they claim to have achieved and what they're experiencing and those kinds of things. Okay, another good way to think of this, and this follows some of the other terminology I've used so far, is the idea of salvation as a cure. And so, if you go back to the predicament, there was the idea of affliction or illness. What good would it be if a religion like a doctor tells you, well, this is your condition, this is the diagnosis, this is what you're suffering from, and prognosis, man, it's not so great, so yeah, take care, and didn't tell you, didn't prescribe something for you to regain your health, right? So that's what religion also tries to do. It not only provides a diagnosis and a prognosis of your condition, but it also gives you a cure, a prescription of then how you become healed, how you regain full health. Okay, so you can think of the cure terminology. And then lastly is liberation, and this goes more to the sort of social description that comes from being in captivity. So salvation then is the liberation from the bondage that you feel you're in, or that you are in, or that there's some sense of being enslaved, whether that's to your own will or desires, or whether that's to something that you feel is external to you. So the how is what salvation is all about, and that's what religion is also going to tell you. Okay, so here is finally a summary of our definition, and then we're going to move on to the model. Okay, so the definition is an activity. First of all, the religion is an activity of a questing individual driven by a need to live in the truth, who seeks to establish and cultivate a personal bond with the absolute. Okay, so there's some new stuff in there that I didn't cover in the earlier part. So it's an activity, so we've covered that part, the quest part, right? And the questing individual. Driven by a need to live in the truth. Okay, so there you're getting into really that whole set, the whole three issues. The predicament, which is where you're going from, then the supreme good, which is where you're going to, and then how you're getting there is the salvation part. And so you become aware that, hey, there is this journey I could take to try to get out of this. And so the driven by a need is you've become aware of the human predicament. You feel the force of it on your life. And so you are driven by that desire and need then to be in contact with the truth of how to be healed, how to overcome predicament. Okay? And so in doing that, you seek to establish and cultivate a personal bond. Okay? So there in other words, you're working on that journey, on that quest toward the higher life, toward the supreme good, toward your highest end, to where you can flourish. And it's a personal thing. This is the existential part of it. It's something that you feel the force of and you feel the need of. And the personal bond with what, though? And that is the highest end, which here I'm using the term the absolute. And I use the term absolute, and this is discussed in your handout in detail. So do take a look at what that means. This can be a deity, but it can also be, something that is impersonal. But take a look at what absolute means in this context so that you understand what this bond is supposed to be connected with. That is part of the supreme good. So this is sort of another way of saying supreme good, is that cultivating a personal bond with the absolute is the supreme good. And the result of having that bond with the absolute is the supreme good. And then religions will describe what that's like in different ways. Okay, there we go. So let's now step through the model and take a look then, just sort of dig into each of the three issues a little more closely. Okay, so the human predicament. Now we're talking about what we're getting saved from, what our quest is taking us away from. Okay, so we just have some quotes here for you about that describe the human predicament in sort of different language And, one or more of these may resonate with you. And so, what do you need salvation from, according to religions? You need it from some vast and universal burden of imperfection, of unreasonableness, of evil, of misery, of fate, of unworthiness, or of sin. All kinds of language that religions use there, all terms, I should say, that they use to describe this vast and universal burden that each of us can feel in moments. It's also described by Simone Weil as a condition of generic wretchedness. And just a quick note, Simone Weil is an interesting philosopher. She was she took up arms against the fascists in Spain, and so she fought alongside the Reds, the communists there, and he was a philosopher, taught mathematics also, but she ended up fleeing France, her native country, when Germans occupied it, living in England, where she died from a hunger strike because of the way her fellow countrymen were being treated. She would not take more rations than the worst the prisoners were given. As a result, she died. So you think of what it would be like to live sort of the most active years of your life in the midst of a horrible worldwide war, and you can understand why she might use this language of generic wretchedness. This was someone who felt that deeply and wanted to connect with that and to sympathize with it and have compassion for it. Then probably one of my favorites is one that I came across not too long ago. I read a review of Francis Bufford's book, and now I didn't put the title on here. I should do that. Maybe I'll do that in the notes. But it's the human propensity to F things up. That's another way to describe the human predicament, kind of colorful, and it's actually pretty good description when it comes to thinking about not only how you're affected by others in the human predicament, but then how your own propensity to do that at times. I speak for you, but I do this myself, so I think it's fair to say that's a pretty good description. I'll own that one. And then there's a movie called Grand Canyon, and Danny Glover is looking over the wreckage of aftermath of a riot, and he's standing around looking at just the waste of energy and material and human life after this riot, and he just stands there, just dazed, stunned, and says, "It's not supposed to be this way." And if you've ever looked in the face of suffering, and you've sort of rebelled at what humans can do to each other and to the world, to the vulnerable, you can sort of sympathize with that view. Well, these are all, I think, really good ways to talk about the human predicament, to sort of grasp what it's all about. And there's a ton of other ways to talk about it, which I'll send you in a separate question that I'm going to pose as your first challenge question. More about that. Okay, so now let's get into the diagnosis here. This is the causes and symptoms of the human predicament. So, why do humans have a propensity to F things up? Why is the world seem to be often in a state where we have this insight it's not supposed to be this way? Why is there so very much suffering in the world? So let's look at that. And by the way, suffering, I don't mean just physical suffering, I mean also mental anguish too. That's prevalent too. And they go together. Okay, so if we look at one of the metaphors for the human predicament, the health and sickness metaphor, we see this mentioned as an illness. So the reason we're in the human predicament is that we are suffering from some illness or some disorder. If you see the language of bondage, then you'll hear the religion talk about our predicament as one of being in a state of oppression. of having a very keen sense of that, or of being a slave to something, whether that's our passions or whether that is external things like social systems, injustice, and so on. Or they'll describe the human predicament as a prison, where for whether it's, and fault doesn't really have anything to do with it, it's just sort of waking up and realizing, oh wow, I'm a prisoner. Sure, we'd like to get out of this. So the next sort of cluster of terms to describe human predicament focuses around knowledge, or really the lack of it. And so you'll see it described as the cause of our suffering. The cause of human predicament is ignorance, or it's delusion, or it's unreasonableness, right? And unreasonableness can be not only the unreasonableness of how others behave, and the unreasonableness of attitudes, but also just the seeming that, like Danny Glover's character, it's not supposed to be this way. In other words, society isn't supposed to have this much violence and dysfunction. It's very unreasonable that we can't figure that out. Okay, so then the human predicament also talks about the prognosis. So, what can we do about it? And that is so each religion is going to have something to say about that as well. The consequences of doing nothing, you can have an awareness of being in the human predicament and then just do nothing about it, or sort of reject the different suggestions for how you can come into a state of wisdom or a state of health or freedom. You can do nothing, and then the religion will probably have something to say about the consequences of that if you don't. So that'll be also part of the account, is the prognosis. And that gets us right into then the salvation, which is how to overcome the predicament. And so there are two senses of, how, or let me rewind that. There are two types of analogies the religions will make about salvation. One will use external analogies, and so here I've listed some of those: liberation, or deliverance, or rescue. All those things that are done by an outside force or person to bring you out of the human predicament. Then there are the phrases or terms that are used to describe salvation as an internal process, where it is either self-directed or self-discovered, and the terms often associated with that are things like enlightenment or transformation. Now, transformation can actually go in either category. I really should have put it in both lists, since the transformation can be both something you do as well as something that's done to you. And really, the sophisticated religions typically do have both of those going on in their account of salvation. Okay, there's also the language of healing. So I mentioned that earlier as a really helpful metaphor, the health and sickness metaphor. There's a famous parable that you'll read about called the poisoned arrow in Buddhism. So that's a great one that illustrates this idea that salvation is a healing process. So it's a remedy to the human predicament for what we suffer from, or a cure to it. Okay, so there's a big fancy word for you: soteriology. So soteriology is simply what the sort of logical account of salvation in the religion. What is the process or system or description of salvation, of how we get out of the human predicament or overcome it to get toward the supreme good. And the first part, there's two parts of it to a soteriology, and that is, and this comes from philosopher Josiah Royce. So first of all, there's the paramount end or aim of human life, relative which, now there's the supreme good, relative to which all other aims are, all other goods are, at best, inferior. This is what salvation is too. So it's not necessarily denying the goodness of lesser goods or lesser aims, but it's saying that, look, there is some paramount aim that is the solution to the predicament. And then the second part of a soteriology then is sort of the warning part of it, which is that as we naturally are, we're in danger of missing that highest aim, our highest good, and that is that's the prognosis, as we naturally are. And so we need to attend to what we can do then to get on the quest toward the supreme good. Otherwise, we will miss out, and we will continue to suffer the ill effects of being in the human predicament, without remedy. Okay, so some common questions in soteriology, and these are questions you can be looking to answer as you're doing your reading in the text. Is how is the way of salvation to be discovered? How do you come to know it? Where do you get this insight about how to get on the right quest? Okay, where is salvation to be found? Do I simply sort of wander randomly through life and looking and waiting and keeping my eyes open and sort of learning as I go by experience, by trial and error? Are there gurus or teachers that can instruct me or guide me? Are there texts? Are there written records that I can consult for help or guidance? So where is salvation to be found? And I think I don't even have to say it really, but I mean, just to say it, is that, it's often not going to be one thing. It's going to be a cluster of things. And so I gave you 3 examples there. And then another important soteriological question is, how is it to be attained? So there's discovering it, there's where to find the path, the quest, and then how is it to be attained? How do I stay on the quest and not fall off and not lose my way, not get distracted, those kinds of things. So pay attention. This is kind of a big point that I think a lot of students miss, is that you don't want to reduce this issue of salvation down to one thing. It's always more complicated than that. One clue, one thing to look for in just about all of the readings, you'll see this, is that a process is described that as you mature through the quest, you're going through different stages of life. And those stages of life will correspond to sort of mileposts that you're passing on this quest, on this path of salvation. So be aware of that and look at those carefully to understand how they fit into the larger scheme of what the predicament is, where you're trying to get out of, the process of doing it, how you do that, and then where you're headed to. Okay, so let's talk briefly again some of the language around the quest. I mentioned the way. This is literally in Taoism, it's the Tao, but lots of other religions use the language of way to be on the way, to be on the right way, to be on the way of health. Journey, I've mentioned that before. Sometimes these are actual analogies of specific journeys that figures have taken. And we'll look at Siddhartha, for example, in Buddhism, who goes on a journey, and that journey mirrors the kind of journey that we all can take to become enlightened as the Buddhas. Sojourn. Now this is an interesting one because it has kind of a negative connotation, a slight negative connotation. It's like a delayed. It's a delay to your destination. You are. It's like you're staying longer in one place than you meant to or thought you would have to. So sojourning, you can look at the entire time we spend on earth as a sojourn. That it's not ultimately all there is. It's not ultimately the payoff to escape the predicament, but we are sojourning through the difficulties of life, trying to stay on the way. And so we, each day we're closer to reaching our highest end. But while we're here, it is, we're given certain tasks to do, and we stay on the journey. So you see journ there, the root journ is part of journey. So sojourn implies, sort of a delay, not being stuck, that's not the right thought there, but of, sometimes wandering off course a bit and then working to get back. So it's not like a direct A to B line. Sojourn doesn't suggest that about the quest. And lastly, one I mentioned earlier is pilgrimage, this idea of going on a specific a journey, more like an A to B kind of thing, but a pilgrimage from a point which can be either an inner state of turmoil or conflict or dissatisfaction to one of satisfaction, or it can be an external kind of pilgrimage where, and the two mirror each other. So the external, like going from your home to a revered site, or some site where all or many people are gathering to perform, in some sort of ritual observance. And so the idea there is, in the external pilgrimage, is also at the same time an internal pilgrimage. So this idea of going to some place to gain knowledge, to gain wisdom, to gain important experience, to gain insight, those are part of that concept. Okay, lastly is then the concept of the supreme good. What it is we are being saved to. And so I've mentioned already that a good term here is our highest good, to which, if there's a highest good, that means there are lesser goods, which, it's different religions are going to express the value or worth of those lesser goods differently. Some will value them more than others. And so that's always interesting to look at, because it gives you maybe a clue as to how difficult the journey is to the highest good. Ultimate reality is another way to describe the highest good, where we're getting to maybe a divine realm, where the human and the divine intersect or meet. And that can often, you often hear the language of God referred to as the ultimate reality, but not necessarily. But the sort of lesser term to ultimate reality, or the absolute, is contingent beings. And so again, what is the value or worth of contingent existence? And contingent existence includes not only you and I, not only all mortal things, but the entire universe, which exists contingently. It didn't have to be. And so what is the value or worth of all those contingent beings relative to the ultimate reality? And then the language of the highest end or goal. So here we're talking about the outcome when the human predicament no longer holds sway over one's life. What is that? What kind of life is that? What's that like? How can we describe that? And then another way is the goal toward which the way or pilgrimage takes one. So you can think of the highest end or goal as, if we get to that, then that goal is superior or better than all of the lesser goals. Okay, another way to think of the highest end is the full potential, our full potential as human beings. So what can human life be when it is unencumbered by the human predicament? Whatever that is, whatever kind of life that would be, that's our highest good. The language of freedom. So there's the state of existence unburdened by the things that imprison and oppress, captivate, or otherwise prevent us from completing the way or pilgrimage. And so the highest end is often described as freedom, this sort of full, complete state of freedom. And then last, I think this is last, the higher life. And this is where the divine life of true and permanent happiness, and eternal life, it's often described as, or a life in union with the absolute. This gets into interesting questions of identity. What of myself remains in this divine life at the end of the quest, at the end of the journey, this higher life? What will I experience it as an I, as an ego? Or do I dissolve and become one with whatever this absolute is? And we'll see religions have a different description of that higher life. A real key component of understanding supreme good is what's described in your handout as the unseen order, and this is a really imperfect way to describe the reality described by religion that is not accessible through mere physical means. So our outer senses, our sight, what we see, what we hear, what we can touch, those kinds of things are going to be inadequate to capture or describe the reality toward which religions point as our not only our highest end, but also as the way, as part of the quest, is to be in contact in some way or another with this unseen order. It's not just it's not just like a ghostly thing. It's not just like an immaterial heaven. That really is very superficial understanding of unseen order. It has more to do with a divine reality, and it's complicated because that divine reality, it penetrates into our ordinary reality, the seen order, if you want to put it that way, the material universe, the physical universe. All religions have some account of that. And so the complication then is to understand how religion both talks about the unseen order, the divine reality, as something that transcends the mundane world, this world of ordinary sense and materiality and physicality, but also something that's immanent to that same world. And without that, it'd be very difficult to imagine that you're, on the right path. And just about every religion talks about, sort of an experimental way to test these realities, and not to test realities, that's not the right word, but to test your grasp or awareness, your intuition of not only the human predicament and the way to health, the cure, but then what little taste or glimpses you get of the highest good. And so the unseen order comes under that highest good category, because ultimately that is where the pull or the draw is from to get us into a state of health, of our full potential, and so on. So anyway, take a look closely at the handout, because I go into a lot of detail about the unseen order, so that doesn't get muddy for you. So do take a look at that. So another key component in the path from the human predicament to our highest end is going to be some account of the moral or spiritual transformation that's needed. So this is part of that salvation process. And so be looking for how the religion describes that transformation, of how it occurs and how you move it along. Okay. And then finally, I want to just briefly touch on how you apply the model to the readings and what you're looking for. So when you're talking about the human predicament, you're asking a set of key questions. You're asking, what is the cause of the human predicament? What are its symptoms? What effects does this illness, if we can use that term, what are its effects on our moral knowledge, on our moral experience? Things that we suffer from, not only the things that we do, but the things that are done to us. What about the noetic effects? Okay, so there, noetic has to do with the mind, and so what does the religion say about how the human predicament affects our thinking, our desires, our emotions, our will? What are the symptoms that we can point to as yep, that's part of the problem right there? Then we can ask, is it curable? So look for answers to that question, and can it be cured in this mortal life or not? That's another interesting question that religions will often answer. Now, as I go through these, I'm not suggesting that all of these questions will be answered explicitly in your text, but these are a set of questions you should be looking to try to answer, what the human predicament is according to the religion. Next. Oh, yeah, I had an example for you. So Taoism I did not assign for our 5-week class because it was probably the most difficult one to apply the model to, and it would occur. And I didn't want you to struggle with this. And so I gave you actually an example here of how you look for the human predicament in Taoism. So in the Smith text, there really isn't much that's said directly about the human predicament. Everything is indirect. In other words, you can look at what the religion describes as a healthy state of being on the way of salvation, and then look at how people are described as being on that way, and then consider, okay, well, if I'm not on that way, then what are the sort of opposite effects or consequences? And so what I did is I pulled some examples from the primary texts, the Tao Te Ching, from the Novak book. And so these are really good examples of how you can identify and characterize the human predicament using the primary text, using the Novak text, if the Smith text fails you for sort of laying it out explicitly. So if you look through these items here, you can see the sort of person that is described here as being in this predicament, as the causes of it, as the symptoms of it. Okay, so that was just a quick example I wanted to give you of that. Okay, next set of questions is to figure out how does religion describe salvation. So questions we can ask: what is the cure to our unsatisfactory condition? You've given me the diagnosis, you've given me the prognosis. Now, what's the cure? What do I do? How do we obtain knowledge of the cure? So, it's not just what is our medicine, and the medicine is often going to be acquiring some specific knowledge that we need. What is needed to treat our condition? And this can often be in the way of some sort of practice. What do we need to work on ourselves to treat this condition? How is the cure implemented? What you've given me, what the cure is, but how does the religion describe how you actually do it? Does it involve acquiring knowledge? Does it involve demonstrating love through deeds? Does it involve mystical experience of attaining a certain kind of spiritual experience? Or is it some combination of these? Again, don't just focus on one thing if there are multiple things offered. You want to represent religion as closely as you can when you are doing your reading. And then finally, once cured, what does the religion describe as the qualities of a healthy life? There has to be some claim about, well, this is what a fully healthy human life, physically, morally, spiritually, mentally, this is what it is. This is what it's like. So what is that? What does the religion say about that? And then a bunch of questions, and I'm not going to read them all, about the supreme good for humans. You can look at the slides. You can look at this slide more closely. I've provided it on the handout anyway, so do have a look at that. And the religion will describe the supreme good in many different ways. It won't just be one straightforward account. It won't always tell you explicitly about a deity, for example, because it may not really have a deity. Buddhism, for example, or at least some forms of Buddhism, that's not part of the ultimate reality. It's not part of the absolute. But you'll find Smith very, very good on this subject, because he, I think, does such a great job of showing you the complexities of giving an account of this, because this is oftentimes the hardest thing to describe, since you're talking about something that is not part of our everyday experience. It's something that often extends beyond our mental grasp. And so at best, often we are stuck with analogies. So, but Smith, like I said, is very good about giving different ways that the religion characterizes the supreme good, the ultimate destination. Okay, so that is the end of my slide. I'll just go back to that last slide. That's the end of going through the model. I hope that this is helpful. And like I said, if you have any questions about how you use the model to go through your readings, this will be great preparation for your quizzes, and it will be really essential for you to tackle the challenge questions that I'm going to put on each quiz as an extra credit. So do be in touch with me if you have any questions about anything I covered in this, or anything that you've read in the handout that you want more clarification about. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you in our next video, which is going to be Hinduism.